good people of the internet. Today I'm out here in beautiful Eagle View out in Sanderstone in South Australia, countryside, at this wonderful four-wheel drive track with rather a wonderful four-wheel drive, I reckon. This is the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon, and this is a really important vehicle for Jeep. Jeep and in general Fiat Chrysler brands in Australia have been trying to reinvent themselves over the last couple of years to alleviate buyers' concerns. And between a more comprehensive ownership plan and package for all Jeep vehicles and the introduction of this thing, a Ute, which obviously Australians love. The two best-selling vehicles in the country are dual cab Utes. Between that, Jeep, I reckon, might have a plan for success on their hands with this thing. Clearly, this thing isn't aiming at your average run-of-the-mill Toyota Hilux or Ford Ranger. Rather, this is a real niche buy aiming at the top end of the market. As such, you're up against factory-modified Utes like the Ford Ranger Raptor and the Nissan Navara Warrior, as well as its fellow American expats, the Chevrolet Silverado 1500 and the Ram 1500 as well, because price-wise, this thing's up there. It starts at around about the $76,000 mark for a Rubicon like this, and as this one sits, it's over $86,000. It's got over 10 grand in options on this thing. All sorts of stuff, from these wheels to the spray-in bed liner and tonneau cover, a full McKinley leather interior, which is really nice, as you'll see in a second. It's a pretty comprehensively spec'd car, this one, but of course makes that price creep up. However, I don't think the average buyer who's going to be interested in this thing is going to be too concerned about price. This is an outright leisure vehicle. It's not a, working vehicle like most dual cab Utes are at the end of the day. This thing is all about fun. And let me show you around it today. I'll give you a quick tour of the interior before we get it out on the track here at Eagle View, and we'll do a bit of on-road driving as well in a little bit. Now, I will show you around the interior first before we take this thing out for a drive, but I figured to get a better camera angle, might pull out this car's party trick, or one of its party tricks, which is that you can remove the doors very easily. So let's go about it. We've got a whole toolkit with instructions here from Jeep. Let's do it. So first things first, we just got to undo a couple of bolts here on the bottom of the door, which doesn't take too long, only a couple of minutes. Unless your tool slips out because you're a moron. There we go. Next step is we pry off this cover and undo a bit of wiring here. And then we've just got one more little bolt there to undo as well. And just like that, doorless. And then with your bolts, there's a little tray under here. You can store those in and make sure you don't lose them. Now, moving inside the Gladiator with this much wider angle that I'm able to show you from now, these roof panels do also pop out. You will see that in some of the other footage later on that we've removed the roof. But the rest of the inside of this vehicle, let's talk about that, because it's a surprisingly nice place to be. Anyone who's been in a Jeep of old is going to know that they used to feel pretty utilitarian inside and a bit cheap and nasty. Not so in the case of the Gladiator. Everything, steering wheel, dashboard, armrests, the seats, they're all beautifully leather wrapped. Worth mentioning that this one does have an optional leather package on it, which does dress it up a bit. Normally you get cloth seats, but overall the finish of everything feels really high quality. You got sort of anodized metal on the dashboard there, although it's a bit weird that it's red rather than orange like the exterior of the car. All the buttons everywhere inside the vehicle, they all feel really high quality. Now, I will say this thing's got a great infotainment system in it, this Uconnect system. Both the screens in the gauge cluster and in the middle, they're exceptionally high quality. The resolution on them is really excellent and they're nice and responsive. You've got a lot of interesting things in there, like these off-road pages, which tells you all sorts of information about, you know, accessory gauges. You've got pitch and roll angles, drivetrain information telling us the sway bar is disconnected right now and we're in low range, and trail cam, which is a really handy feature, showing you a view out over the front where you can't normally see, given this thing's very high and squared off bonnet. The fact that it's got guidelines on it that move as you turn the wheel, really handy as well. They've thought about it a lot. It's even got a little washer in it to clean it too, so that's very clever. I like that it's got a lot of hard buttons for controls as well, things like the heated seats, heated steering wheel. You can control all that through the infotainment system, but it's nice to have the hard buttons as well, so you don't have to go through there. We do have some off-road gear as well, front and rear diff locks, which is unique to the Rubicon specification, along with an off-road plus mode, which is unique to the Gladiator, and a disconnecting front sway bar. Obviously I mentioned that was disconnected before. Got some, pop it in drive so you can see, there's some nice auxiliary switches down here as well. You can wire up things like spotlights or a radio too, and it gives a nice OEM appearance for all of that. And we've got a nice proper manual four-wheel drive selector, which is great when you're out in the bush, because it means that you won't have any electronics to worry about with a little rotary dial, which isn't exactly the most reassuring thing in the world to use. A couple more cool features in the back as well. This all folds up and you've got a nice lockable compartment down here with these removable dividers for storing long items in. Obviously you can lock them, so if you have the doors off, like we do right now, you don't have to worry about your things being nicked. Also, if we pull down the back seat here, this is a nice and handy feature. A little Jeep Bluetooth speaker. Very thoughtful for when you're tailgating in your recreational vehicle. All right, now we're out here on the trails at Eagle View. Truth be told, I've actually been going for a couple of hours already. We pitted this thing against some much harder stuff than what we're on right now, just on these beautiful trails through most of the property. There are a couple of trickier, rocky sections that you can opt to go for when you're going around here. We tried the first one, which at first it was handling it really nicely. The long wheelbase of this thing and long overall length of the entire vehicle does become a bit of a pain at some points when you're trying to maneuver it around, you know, sort of bigger rocks at the side of the road, but for the most part it was handling it no worries. The front and rear diff locks as well are really nice and quick to engage, and the 77:1 crawl ratio when you're in first gear really helps you be gentle with the throttle, and you can really do a very easy job of getting through everything without stressing the engine too much. However, we did reach one particularly tricky part, which I did have to back out of, this tight downhill right-hander where the thing was just slipping too much. There was a boulder sort of on the inside, on the driver's side of that turn, and because the rear left was in the air, it sort of kept slipping closer and closer. You'll see a little bit of footage of it overlaid here. That's, you know, if it was my car and if I had those sort of optional steel bar doors, the tubular doors that you can get for this thing, I wouldn't have worried too much about trying to go through that. But given this isn't my car and I don't have those doors on it, I don't really want to scratch up this nice orange paintwork on a press car. So I backed out of it, which, you know, you can say what you will in the comments, and I know you do on every single off-roading video, not just of mine, but of everyone else's. Oh, you're not off-roading it properly. Well, the video doesn't really convey just how difficult some things are when you're off-roading. A two-dimensional view of it doesn't exactly tell you just how steep it is and just how, you know, brown trouser inducing some moments can be, and that was certainly one of them. Bit of mud to go through here. Got the diffs locked, so no worries. Easy.
Nice.
No worries. It's really great how quick the front and rear diff locks are to engage on this thing, because if you need them in a pinch, and it generally is in a pinch that you're going to need them, it only takes a couple of seconds and boom, you've got them. The one thing I will say is really good about having the long wheelbase though, despite the fact it makes it a bit ungainly when you're trying to get through those really tight turns, does help this thing feel, for the most part, incredibly sure-footed. Of course, if you've got a wheel in the air, it's going to be a bit tricky, but for the most part, it feels nice and stable, both on the road and off the road too. Let's talk about the fact that we do have a V6 petrol engine as well. It's kind of a shame that there isn't a diesel option, it must be said, because obviously fuel consumption's not exactly great with a big donk like this. Let me see what we're at. Close to 15 litres per 100 Ks at the moment, 14.7 on the trip computer showing. So it's thirsty work what we're doing here. And that's where a diesel would be nice to have. However, a Revvy petrol is good in some scenarios though. And I feel like this really low gearing does help bring the best out of it. It's nice and smooth as well, the power delivery from it. It doesn't feel coarse in any way, neither does the transmission, the ZF 8-speed. It's a really good box, as we all know, and in this application it feels great too, so no worries. Now, I will say, perhaps the most helpful thing I've encountered so far today, while this has heaps of off-road information in it, the trail cam has to be the most helpful thing. Helps you position it very nicely and makes it a lot easier than you'd think it's going to be. Of course, where we are right now isn't exactly the most challenging part of the track, but as I said earlier this morning, everything we threw it against, handled all the tough stuff, no worries. All right, now it's a couple of days later and my sunburn from the day off-roading out at Eagle View still hasn't fully healed, but I wanted to talk about this car's on-road performance anyway. For a vehicle with front and rear live axles, this thing, I think it's impressed me more than just about any other. I've driven a few cars with a similar sort of setup recently. The Suzuki Jimny, the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser, and they're not the greatest things to drive on the road, let's be honest. I don't think anyone's going to try and hide that fact, because the whole point with these vehicles, if you've got live axles front and rear, it's clearly because your focus is on off-roading. You want that improved articulation angle that comes from having a live axle that moves the pivot point to the other side of the vehicle rather than center with independent suspension. But obviously the compromise is on road, except in this case, it isn't really. Maybe it's the long wheelbase that helps it feel very sure-footed, but it drives far better than any other front and rear live axle vehicle I've been in. Now, that's not to say that it's the best handling car in the world. It's not. And I mean, calling it a car, that's quite wrong, isn't it? This really is a truck in the American sense. And I know they call it a mid-size over there, but this thing's far too big, in my Australian opinion. But even still, it drives phenomenally well for what it is. Now, if you push it hard through a corner, it's obviously going to understeer. I don't think there's any surprise about that, but it must be said that it remains far flatter and the body roll is controlled far better than in any other vehicle of this kind. It really is a nice thing to drive. The steering is nice and weighty. I like fairly heavy steering personally. The ride quality is very good too, given we're on coil springs. Now, yes, you'll feel some of the bigger bumps, but again, the fact that it's got such a long wheelbase helps the vehicle absorb more of those road imperfections. I've got to say that Wind noise, we're doing about 100 k's an hour along this road. Wind noise is fairly well suppressed for a vehicle this boxy and with this many easily removable panels. I mean, the fact these lift out with a couple of clips and the doors come off with 3 bolts, you know, despite that, the wind noise is really well managed, it must be said. Tyre noise, not so good. Given we're on mud terrain tyres with this Rubicon model, of course, off-road, they're going to be great, but on-road, not so much so. And up at about 100 k's an hour like we're doing right now, yeah, they're roaring quite noticeably, but it's a small price to pay. And if you turn up the radio, which is really good, this Alpine stereo system fitted to this thing, then it drowns it out very effectively. So, you know, small price to pay, I would argue, for increasing its off-road capabilities with a set of proper tyres from the factory. Now, for as thirsty as it is, this 15 litre per 100 V6 petrol engine, because yes, that's what it's been doing during my week with it, despite the fuel economy penalties that it clearly takes, given this is a heavy vehicle with an Atmo petrol engine, you know, I really like having a petrol engine in it. It's very smooth, very quiet, and when you do get on it, doesn't make a bad noise, to be honest, and it moves fairly effectively. It could perhaps do with a little bit more get up and go when you're at these higher speeds, but for the most part, honestly, it's really good. Honestly, I don't have very many complaints about this thing.
While there may be some compromises with the Gladiator Rubicon, such as the deafening tyre roar when you're on the road or its ungainly length when you're off it, it must be said that for the most part it's an incredibly charming, capable and ultimately likeable vehicle. For one that's all about fun, it certainly nails the brief. While the high price may look to be a potential hindrance down under, Aussies have shown in recent years that they're happy to splash cash on bigger and brawnier utes, and that's why I think Jeep could really be onto a winner with this thing.
And we'll edit this bit out.